Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to Misinformation and Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm your host Annie, and today with us we have Ian Shapiro. Awesome. Welcome. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Sure, I'm a political scientist and I work mostly on issues to do with democracy. And I teach at Yale in political science and global affairs.
Yeah, so what inspired you to focus your career on political science and particularly like democracy and justice and social inquiry?
Um, I grew up in South Africa when there was no democracy, and I had practical reasons for being interested in it. And uh, most of my work has grown out of those convictions, I would say, yeah.
I see. How do you think misinformation affects the functioning of democratic societies and the pursuit of justice?
Well, I think that democratic societies have become more vulnerable to misinformation in recent decades, mostly because of um, technology. So, you know, 40 years ago, say in the US, at 6:30 every night, everybody watched one of three news channels, and uh, they carried a pretty broad spectrum of views. And indeed, at that time, there was even regulation that required them to. There was something called the Fairness Doctrine, mandated by the FEC, Federal Election Commission, which said that if you put on a view from the ideological left, you also had to put one on from the right, essentially.
Mm.
And the justification for that was scarcity, that there were only three channels. It's NBC, CBS, and ABC. There might have been public television as well or something, but basically there were three major networks.
Mm.
And what happened to that fairness doctrine is that with the advent of cable, the scarcity argument went away because suddenly there were dozens and then scores and then hundreds of channels. And so the argument for limiting the free speech of news organizations on the grounds that there was only a limited number available to people to watch went away. And so it was during the Reagan administration, the 1980s, they abandoned the fairness doctrine. And that began the world that we have gotten into, where, people on the left go to MSNBC and people on the right go to Fox, and everybody goes to uh, information sources that confirm their existing beliefs, basically. So it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling echo chamber. And there's quite a lot of work which shows by political scientists and psychologists, which shows that if people just talk to people like themselves, they tend to become more extreme.
Mm.
So, so we went from three networks to cable to satellite, and suddenly it wasn't 150 channels, it was 600 channels. And then we've gone to social media now, where people don't even get their news from TV, most of them, and they can talk to a very narrow sliver of like-minded people all day long. And that's very bad for democracy, because it means that people don't have to confront and think about views other than the ones they already hold. And if the social psychology literature is to be believed, it's going to make them even more extreme. And that's going to contribute to things like polarization and so on. So it's been a huge change basically since the 1960s, 1970s, and it's a tough problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how can political leaders and institutions like identify and like counteract the spread of misinformation then, like within their spheres of influence?
It's very difficult because this has become the dominant way. This kind of siloed system has become the dominant way in which people get information.
Mhm.
Obviously made worse by things like the role of money in politics. Um, so um, probably what's needed is some updating of the logic behind the fairness doctrine for our era, that would require, uh, maybe at least, I I haven't really done much work on this, but one could, require uh, that things like political debates be broadcast on a number of different outlets, that um, there would have to be regulation. They wouldn't be able to pick and choose just what they wanted. They would
Mhm.
they would have to, their licensing would have to include an obligation to carry, at least during election season, information from, you know, uh, all points of view. Um, and that would be a lot easier to achieve in countries other than the US, because we have the First Amendment here, which would makes it very difficult for the government to tell any organization what speech to put on, and unless there's, some reason, like there was in the 60s, when the 70s, when they had the fairness doctrine, there was the scarcity of channels. So, somebody would have to come up with a creative way of making the argument that even though there are a gazillion of sources now, there's nonetheless a scarcity of the kind of information that people need in order to think critically about politics. And that's an artifact of this system of silos. And so it would be, it'd be a very hard argument to make, because I think the courts would be inclined to strike it down. So you'd need a lot of creative, smart people of your generation to figure out how to do that.
Mhm. Yeah. So how can then like individuals take responsibility of like their own like consumption and sharing of like political information? Um, yeah.
They should, I mean, the way you take responsibility is to read sources that you're not predisposed to agree with. Watch,
Mhm.
get information sources you're not predisposed to agree with. You know, have, have debates where, you know, you are assigned to defend a view that you might not agree with. And you'd have to go and do research and get information from sources that are not going to occur naturally to you as the right answers. Um, because unless people confront and respond to and engage with arguments they don't agree with, you just get a repeat of the cycle of the echo chamber.
Yeah. So, um, how do you like, I guess, envision the future of democracy and justice, given like the ongoing challenge of misinformation, um, in our society?
Well, it's not the only threat to democracy. I think the main threat to democracy has come from something else. It's come from the disappearance of stable employment for large parts of the population. The era when somebody finished their education and then worked for a company for 35, 40 years and retired is gone.
Mm,
At your age are probably going to change jobs 12 to 15 times in their lifetime. And that can be frightening for many people because often the jobs they switch to are worse than the jobs they had, worse than the jobs they
mm,
expected to get, have fewer medical benefits, don't have retirement benefits. And so those people are anxious and afraid. And it's very easy for them to be mobilized by demagogues to support anti-system. They say neither of the political parties is doing anything for you, so you need to support. Only I can fix it. I have all the answers. This kind of thing,
mhm,
and the failure of both parties to attend to the fallout of this massive employment insecurity that's gotten so much more pronounced in the last few decades, not just in the U.S., but in all of the democratic capitalist systems, means that you've got bigger and bigger proportions of the population who are anxious and afraid and easily pressed into supporting anti-system candidates, anti-system parties, people that promise big fixes and so on. And so, the answer to that is for the mainstream parties to start delivering the sorts of things that would respond to the economic insecurity that so many people are experiencing.
mhm. Yeah.
So, like after the financial crisis of 2008, most governments bailed out the banks, but they didn't do much in this country. 20 million people lost their homes. That's a lot of people. And not much was done for them. And so it's not surprising those kind of people can be angry and resentful and support populist candidates that, feed on that anger and resentment.
Yeah. So, last question. What advice would you give to young people who like aspire to become like leaders in their fields and um yeah, and maybe like help address the misinformation problem, but like um yeah, just
I
what
think,
advice would you
the sorts of things we've been talking about. I think join debate teams, educate yourself, make sure you're not just going on social media, and you need to you need to take yourself out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
You need to seriously consider views that you would be inclined to just write off, and you need to educate yourself about what's the big changes in the economies of all of these countries that are happening, and so when you go to college and so on, you can think about, or law school, whatever it is you end up doing, ways of addressing the basic underlying problems. So people tend to say, oh, uh, you know, Trump is the problem, and Trump, is he going to run again or isn't he going to run again? Is he going to win again? That's the wrong question. The question is, what produced Trump? We've never had a president like Trump before. So what produced Trump? Because if you don't, and it's not just here. Comparable politics are going on in, you know, all the advanced, all the democracies. You're getting populist anti-system candidates doing well in Germany, in France, and lots of, and Britain. It's clearly not, nothing specific to America. So you need to educate yourselves about what are the underlying problems, what is generating this kind of politics, and then what are the ways to address the underlying problems? Because otherwise, whether or not Trump runs again is beside the point. There'll be another Trump and another Trump. If what's producing that kind of politician, or Le Pen in France, it's the same kind of thing. What
Mhm.
if your generation doesn't find a way to address the basic security of large proportions of the population, things could end pretty badly. That's, the closest historical parallel is the 1930s, and that didn't end well.
Mm.
It ended in collapse of a lot of democracies and the rise of fascism and communism and lots of bad stuff. So, it's the challenge for your generation.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Go do it.
Sorry?
Go do it.
Yeah. Um, all right. So thank you for your time and for
Okay,
the
good luck.
opportunity. Yeah. Take care.
Ciao.